So we're back on the 300 blackout project. Now, if you saw the earlier videos, you know that I'm loading 13.8 grains of H110 out of a brand new mech powder dispenser. Now, the bottle that's on there, by the way, is not the one that comes in the box when you buy one of these new. I pulled that off of the mech shot shell loader just because I was only going to put a little bit in there because I was only going to load 60 cartridges. 13.8 of H110, well, I don't need to fill up. I don't need a whole bottle on there. However, as it was a brand new dispenser, I was kind of paying attention to how consistent it was. Now, once I got that set up, I deliberately set that up to get it dropping about 13.5 grains, and I was going to use the mech trickler to get up to exactly 13.8. Now, about 12, 15 or so cartridges into this, the powder dispenser started creeping upwards with how much it was dropping, and it went from 13.5 to 13.8, exactly the amount that I wanted. Now, I can't necessarily explain why it crept upwards, but it crept up to 13.8 and it stayed spot on right there. So it's like, I don't know why, but I'll take it. Love that. Because I was loading a 180 grain Hornady flat face spire point, when you go to put the bullet on top of the mouth of the casing on a bottleneck like this, you have to hold it with your fingers and guide it into the seating die, or it's going to fall off. So I used the Lee universal flaring die to put a little bit of a flare on that so I could set the projectile on the case mouth, take my fingers away, and I can run it up into the seating die, zero issues. Now, as I flared those and primed them in the same step, I was dropping them into a Lyman ammo checker. Now, when you flare the mouth on a bottleneck casing like that you don't normally flare the mouth on, typically if you're loading a boat tail bullet, there's no reason to. I noticed kind of scraping on the sides of the ammo checker on its way down because I opened up the mouth a little bit more than it probably would have been. So they didn't always necessarily, they pretty much sat flush with the top, but they were sluggish going in. Now my thought was as I seat the bullets, you're going to take some of that flare out and bring that to pretty much back to its neutral position as they're being seated. So what I did was I set this up to where I would take and I screwed down the body of the die. Now this is an RCBS seating die that will have a crimp function to it. So I take that seating die with an empty casing, I put the empty casing in here and I run this up and I screw it down until I feel the resistance. That's the point at which the crimp function is going to begin. But I don't want to crimp and seat in one operation. I want to do it in two separate steps because you always get a better result when you do it like that. So I got them seated, throw my powder charge, they're all exactly 13.8. I got them seated to the correct overall length. And then as I'm loading, I'm dropping them into the ammo checker on each and every one because I'm checking them as I go. Now that drops right in, zero issues. But some of these ended up sitting a little bit proud in here. So, and they weren't doing that before, and they're a little bit sticky. So not a big deal because now that I've finished seating them, we're going to do this final step. Now the final step on here is going to be putting a crimp, and then we check them in the ammo checker again to make sure that we've taken all of the flare out. We'll bring the mouth back in a little bit, but the real quick test is if it drops right into the ammo checker flush with the top and then it just dumps right out, we know we've got it nailed. So what we do is now we've got the stem of the seating die backed up way too far. Because remember, I don't want to push this bullet any deeper. So what I'm going to do is a loaded round in here. I run this up and I screw this down now until I start to feel the resistance. That's the point at which the crimp function is going to begin on this die. So I lower the ram and now I'm going to turn it down, say an eighth of a turn, and I'm going to set my lock ring. And when I run this up at the very top of the stroke, I should feel a tiny bit of resistance, which I do right there. Now it's not heavy. It is a little bit of resistance. Now I'm going to grab my ammo checker and it dropped right in flush. I tip it over and it drops right out. So it's the flaring operation that is making this sluggish or not drop all the way into the ammo checker. Now that would be a problem chambering, locking up, and firing flawlessly in your firearm. So if you are doing this, you don't necessarily, as you're loading, checking each and every single one in a case gauge or an ammo checker or whatever you wanted to do. I was doing this because I like to know exactly what's going on with each one every single step of the way. So what I'm doing now is I'm going to go back and I'm going to put a light crimp on every single one of them. And I am going to double check them in the ammo checker, each and every one. Because when I get to the range and I start shooting, the last thing in the world I want is to have any problems with my ammunition. That should function flawlessly. Now, if you're not aware of this, when you do flat base bullets on a bottleneck casing, the more pronounced the shoulder is, when you're putting on a flat base bullet, if you don't have any flare or anything on there, you're putting pressure when you seat that on the mouth of the casing. The more pressure you apply from the mouth on the neck downward, at some point, something's going to give. So what can happen is you end up crushing the shoulder right here, and then you're going to see right there, it's going to flare, it's going to bow, or you could end up bowing the base of the case right here. So if you are loading flat base bullets and you are not going to flare, have a case gauge. If you're doing a bolt gun, have the rifle there. Make sure, or grab your calipers and just measure every step along the way to make certain that what you're doing isn't somehow bowing the case or collapsing the shoulder. Nothing worse than spending all the time thinking you got perfect ammo, and if you didn't check it right there at the end, it's like, nothing will go. So it's just something to be aware of that you can watch out for. So I'm going to go ahead and run these up into my RCBS seating die where I've got it set up now. You can, by the way, you've probably seen me do this before. I turn it an eighth of a turn or a quarter of a turn, and I do it again just to help with the concentricity to make sure it's as much as I can possibly get it. And again, drop it in the ammo checker, falls right out, zero issues. That is just happy, happy, happy. No problems, perfect ammunition. Don't you just love it when that goes right? Happy trails.